statue's official name is Liberty Enlightening the World, but today it's known as the Statue of Liberty. It was a gift to the United States from the people of France in the year 1886. If we zoom in on Europe, right here is France. And across the ocean over here is the United States. The Statue of Liberty is right here on the East Coast. If we zoom in here, you can see the state of New York and the state of New Jersey. Right in between the two states is the Upper Bay, often called the New York Harbor. The Statue of Liberty is here on Liberty Island. And if we zoom out again, you can see Manhattan with all of its famous New York buildings. Here's Governor's Island, another popular tourist destination, and right here is Ellis Island, where many immigrants entered the United States from 1892 to 1954. As boats sailed into the harbor, the Statue of Liberty would be one of the first views that immigrants would see coming to the United States. The Statue of Liberty has come to be known as a symbol of freedom. In her right hand, she holds a torch, and in her left hand, she holds a tablet that has the date of the Declaration of Independence in Roman numerals. One thing you can't see from the ground is a broken shackle and chain. This is meant to symbolize the end of slavery. The statue is 46 meters tall. If you count from the ground up, it's 93 meters tall. That's about as tall as a 20-story building. Here's the size of a person in comparison to the statue's big toe. When it was complete in 1886, it was the tallest statue in the world. But that title is now held by the Statue of Unity in India. The Statue of Liberty is made up of copper. That's right, it was originally the color of a penny. It only took about 20 years for the air and rain to slowly oxidize the metal and turn it the color green. The copper metal has a thickness of only 2.4 millimeters. That's less than the thickness of 2 American pennies. The statue was built in pieces, and a statue this big takes a lot of planning. The statue was designed by the French sculptor Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi. First, he made the initial sculpture out of clay. This was only 1.2 meters high. The average adult is a little taller than this. Next, a larger version would be twice the size and would be made out of plaster. The next version would be much bigger. This is 1/4 the size of the full statue. At each stage of enlargement, Bartholdi would be able to further perfect the details of the statue. For the full-size version, it had to be built in pieces so it would fit inside the workshop. At one point, to raise money, the finished version of the statue's head was displayed in France, and the right arm and torch was displayed in the United States. Visitors could pay money to climb to the top of each of these. So how do we get from the plaster model of the statue to the finished copper version? Well, the final version was made out of sheets of copper. They used a method called repoussé. Here's how this works. They would take pieces of the full-size plaster model of the statue and build a wooden mold right up next to it. This would then be used to shape the pieces of copper. They would hammer them in place until they would fit the shape of the wooden mold. After that, the copper was supported on the inside with iron straps. Now we have a completed piece of the Statue of Liberty. By themselves, these pieces would never be able to hold their own weight. It needs a supporting structure, and this was designed by Gustave Eiffel. His name might sound familiar to you. Just a few years later, he would go on to help build the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France. The Statue of Liberty has an iron pylon at the very center. You can think of this as the spine to the Statue of Liberty. Then smaller support beams were built around this to support the copper pieces of the statue. The structure would allow the statue to sway in the wind by up to 12 centimeters at the very top. This was all first built in Paris, France, and it took almost 10 years to build. Then, once completed, it was taken apart into 350 different pieces. All of this was shipped across the ocean to the United States. It took another 4 months to reassemble the statue on top of the pedestal. The French paid for the statue itself, but the United States paid for the pedestal. When the statue was finished in 1886, this was called Bedloes Island, but today we call it Liberty Island. The Statue of Liberty has received a few renovations over the years. One of these renovations was the torch. It had been damaged and was leaking rainwater. It was replaced in the 1980s. The original torch is still on display. I'll show you where later in the video. To get to Liberty Island, you have to take the ferry, unless you're a really good swimmer, but I don't recommend that. The ferry leaves from two places, Liberty State Park in New Jersey and the Battery on the southern tip of Manhattan. It takes about 15 minutes to get to Liberty Island.